Hello everyone, it's David Swinowski here from Rubble Road Soapstone Kits, and today we're going to work on the small soapstone seal. We have here the small silhouette. You will see this is a great in-school field trip for kindergarten and up. So inside that kit we're going to have 3 separate pieces of sandpaper. We have the coarse 60 mesh. We're going to use this to do our primary shaping on this stone. After that, we have the 320 grit. This is going to help minimize some of the scratches that we put on this stone. And then to finish it up, we have the 600 grit, which is just going to smooth it out, really help amplify the colors and the natural look of that stone. So we have the bin of water here, which is a great help. We're going to minimize the mess inside the classroom with this water. We're going to use the sandpaper here, put that right in the water. With our soapstone silhouette, one thing that you're going to find out about soapstone, it's so soft you can actually scratch this rock with your thumbnail. One of the softest ones out there. So we're going to use this sandpaper here, get that stone wet. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to concentrate our efforts onto one side of the seal. It's up to you as a student to pick which side you want to work on. I'm going to work on this side here, being the right side of the seal. Now we have the flippers, the back flippers, the head. What I would like to do is, because this is all just one flat edge here, we're going to create some depth on this stone. One thing you have to remember when you're a stone carver is you're not adding any rock, you're only taking stone away. So we want to try and maybe leave the head a little bit bulkier, maybe get some depth on this front fin, and maybe on these back flippers here as well, okay? So I'm going to use my 60 mesh coarse paper. I'm going to fold that in half to give me a nice coarse edge to help me do my primary shaping. As you can see up close here, when I fold that sandpaper, it gives me a nice coarse edge to do my primary shaping on that stone. We have a couple design ideas here. We want to create a front flipper, get a good neckline on this, and maybe make those back flippers pop out a little bit as well. So the only way to do that is to use this sandpaper and scrub into that stone. You're going to notice you're getting rid of some of the stone with that. That's perfectly all right. That's what we want to do. I would also like to see you round off some of these square edges along the back. You know, when we cut these shapes out, it leaves a very squared edge, 90-degree edge on those. We can get rid of those as well. Okay, we can round that off. You can work your stone from different angles. Okay. Move it around. Now the parts that I want to stick out more, I'm doing my best to make sure that I'm not scrubbing against those as I'm working my way around this seal. I really want to try and round off the belly of that seal as well. And then I can also carve into the chest, if you will, and underneath the chin of the seal to really help make that front flipper and the head kind of pop out a little bit. So if you want to get into some even smaller spaces, you can always open up your sandpaper, fold it more than once. If you want to get into a smaller area, fold it 2, 3, 4 times to make that sandpaper more effective for you and do the carving that you want it to do. You can see how it really kind of grinds that stone away. Constant pressure, constant contact, scrubbing into that rock. Now as you get scrubbing and you're removing that stone, you're going to notice that your sandpaper is also filling up with that dust. This is going to make it less effective. That's also why we use the water here. We can rinse that sandpaper out. Get as much of that dust out of that sandpaper so you can go right back to carving. And it keeps that sandpaper working really, really well for you. You'll be shocked as to how far this sandpaper will go, especially when you're using water to help unclog it. Really round. See, I'm kind of rocking that seal back and forth as I'm working by the tail here to help really round off that section of the body. The soapstone that we supply here is Brazilian soapstone, known for its beautiful range of color, but also its softness and ease for carving. One of the reasons we use it. Anybody can carve this stone. One other thing you might notice is as I'm scrubbing this rock, you're going to kind of see some of these colors are kind of coming out a little bit. It's one of the great things about using water, is it kind of helps you see the natural color of your stone even before you do your final sanding. I would like to also make sure that we do a little bit of scrubbing on these other raised areas just to make sure that we get rid of the tooling marks that we've also left behind when we cut these shapes out with the bandsaw. Okay? You'll notice they might show up as parallel stripes. Just make sure that when you're working this surface, it's just a bunch of scratches from this 60 mesh sandpaper and not marks from our bandsaw. Okay. And really round off that belly. Make sure you get a good grip on your soapstone piece here as well, especially when you're carving into the armpits of these seals, because it can be pretty ticklish. Might jump out of your hands. If you want to see the natural colors in these rocks, the only way to do it is to really sand it out. Making sure those gray stripes from the bandsaw, I want to minimize those, make sure they're gone. Really carve in underneath that flipper. I really want that flipper to kind of pop out, so the only way to do that is to really carve down into those areas that you want removed. Another thing you can do is use your thumb in those areas where you know you want to get rid of some rock. You'll be shocked and amazed at how much strength and pressure you can get underneath your thumb, especially on a concentrated area. Nice. I'm working at making that little rounded shape here. Work your way around the corner, right? So my sandpaper is going back and forth, and my other hand is kind of rocking the stone, rotating it, so I can really get a nice rounded edge on that back flipper. Okay. A little bit more around that belly. Every time I'm rinsing off my stone, you're going to notice I'm always rinsing my sandpaper as well. Trying to keep as much dust out of here as I can so that my sandpaper is always effective, always working for me. I'll work on that neckline a little bit here too now. So just like I made a curve here on the back flipper, I want to make a curve for the head as well. Round off those square blocky edges. You know, also I'm going to do is I'm going to taper that nose. Most animals, their nose isn't as wide as the rest of their face. So I'm going to use my coarse edge here. Decide where I want that nose to be kind of narrowed. Just go. Trying to stay on the same line as much as I can, like a train on the track. Just chewing its way. Chewing its way into that stone. Alright. Now that I have a definite ridge there, that's going to help hold my sandpaper in place so I can actually get a little bit more aggressive now, pushing down as I'm scrubbing this rock. And if you should accidentally make a mistake and go off path, that's okay. As long as you don't keep making the same mistake over and over again, any small little mistakes that you make will easily be erased with sandpaper number 2. Okay? So if you happen to make a little small mistake, don't even worry about it. Starting to narrow that nose. Those cheeks to stick out a little bit, right? That's what we're looking for. Fold that sandpaper up again. Make it a little bit smaller for me so I can really round those cheeks off. Going to flatten. It's a little bit pointy at the end of the nose here. I'm just going to flatten that down a little bit. Has more of a beak than a nose right now, so I'm just going to fix that myself. Making sure I rinse that dust out. Now I'm getting pretty close to a finished stage 1. Just going to make sure I'm going through all over my carving right now. Going to get rid of any of those gray stripes from the bandsaw. I want to try and make sure I'm getting the natural color out from this stone as best as possible. And the best way to do that is to do a really thorough stage 1. You make sure you go all over that rock. Stage number 1, rinsing as you go, making sure that it's only smaller scratches that are left behind. Pretty close, I like that. For in here, we got a V shape on that tail. We can actually just use our folded sandpaper, just like that V, match that right up. Put your finger in there, and this way you can kind of sand two edges at the same time. Give it a rinse, take a look. A couple deeper grooves in there. I want to make sure that they're not super deep. A little bit of depth on that back flipper. Maybe a little bit more of a armpit on this guy. It's not too bad. You can really, if you want to, you can really round that belly off. So it's not that square blocky edge that you started with, right? Definite depth on this guy. We've got a great neckline. We've got rear flipper sticking out a little bit more. And then we've also got a rounded belly here to really help make that front flipper stick out a little bit more, right? So we could just round off the body just in front of the flipper here now, okay? Trying not to carve into the chin or that flipper. Just trying to concentrate on this little area in between, right? Pretty happy with that. So I'm just looking to make sure that there's no deeper scratches left on my carving anywhere. If I should happen to see any gray stripes, I'm just going to quickly go over them and just make sure that they're tiny scratches instead of gray striping. Just lightly pushing right now. It's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. For those of you in the classroom, if the teachers have a rasp or a nail or even just some kind of a pointy piece of metal, what you can do is on the opposite side of where the students have been working, you can put their name or their initials on that side. Every artist signs their work. This way you can easily identify which shape belongs to which student, okay? Now, I'm pretty happy with the way my carving is right now. I like my chin line. I like how I've narrowed that nose a little bit, rounded off the front, really rounded that belly off, helped make those back flippers stick out. And then I've also rounded the base of the belly really well, and the back. So I'm pretty happy with sandpaper number 1. So I'm going to take sandpaper 1, set it off to the side, get sandpaper number 2, which is the 320 grit. Now, if you're not sure, it should have the writing on the back. For kids, if you take a look at it, it even has a number 2 right on it. 320, so it has the number 2 right on it, so that's how you know that's number 2 sandpaper. That also goes in the water. When you're scrubbing your stone, you want to make sure you're using the side with the grit, not the side with the writing on it. This side is just paper, okay? You can use this. Give your whole piece of soapstone a good scrub right now. What sandpaper number 2 is going to do is it's going to get rid of those little scratches we just left behind with sandpaper number 1. This is going to start the smoothing process on this soapstone. We're still going to be rinsing off this sandpaper. Let's also rinse the soapstone off in here. Now with sandpaper 2 and 3, one thing I like to make sure I'm being careful of is not to scrub my soapstone on the bottom of my bucket. And the reason that I don't do that is because of sandpaper number 1. As we use this sandpaper, little bits of grit are going to fall off of this paper. You're going to notice you're missing some grit on some of those creases. That's at the bottom of your bucket. And this grit is harder than your soapstone. So if you're scrubbing your soapstone across it, it's going to be scrubbing against that hard grit, and it will be putting more scratches back onto your soapstone. So let's make sure for sandpaper 2 and 3, we're just going to dip the rock in the water to rinse it off. And that way we can get a much better finish. So how am I going to get rid of those little tiny scratches? Well, we'll do the same thing we did with sandpaper number 1. We're just going to scrub this soapstone everywhere. Rinsing lots. Take a look at it. Now what we're looking for are just little tiny scratches. If we have little tiny scratches on that stone, keep scrubbing. You can get rid of them. If you should happen to start scrubbing and there's really, really big scratches, you could always use sandpaper number 1. Make those big scratches smaller so that you can easily erase them with sandpaper number 2. Okay? So my pretty common rule, because we have 3 pieces of sandpaper to go through, the common rule I have is all the scratches that you don't want to see have to be gone before you go to stage 3. Don't forget, underneath the armpit, you can also fold up sandpaper number 2 to make it smaller for you, to help get into those small nooks and crannies on your soapstone carving. Push, push, push. And be careful not to tickle that seal too much, or you might just jump out of your fingers. I always like to make sure I'm working over top of my bucket, so if he does jump out of my fingers, he's going to land in the water, not on the floor. If he does land on the floor, he might be prone to breakage. And if you should happen to accidentally break your soapstone carving, don't worry too much. I just stop immediately, dry off those pieces, and glue them. We will also have some repair videos coming up for everybody here shortly. And notice I'm still using my thumb on a lot of these parts. I find it really easy and effective to use my thumb, especially on smaller little areas, because I can concentrate my efforts onto those a lot easier. There's that little V groove in the tail, so let's fold this sandpaper up a couple more times. Push, push, push. The thing about stone carving is it is a process. It's not one thing you do. It's always a multitude of things. The nice thing, because soapstone is so soft, we only need 3 pieces of sandpaper to get a nice, smooth, beautiful carving out of this stuff. The harder the rock is, the more steps you're going to go through. You're also going to have to use some different equipment if it's really, really hard stone. Just going through everywhere, making sure you do the best job possible. Rinsing constantly so I can see where I have sanded and where I still need to go. Water isn't traditionally used for soapstone carving, but it's definitely functional. It helps me trap the mess that I would have made if I was carving dry. All that dust that I would have created is actually in this water right now. But it's also going to help me see any of the scratches that I would have missed as well. I find I get a way better sanding finish when I'm using water as opposed to carving dry. Couple more little scratches down there. Make sure I get rid of those. Sandpaper 2, it should be feeling pretty smooth. Should also really be seeing those colors coming out now. Should be starting to pop pretty good. Now, I'm just making sure all the scratches I don't want to see are gone before I go to sandpaper 3. I find the last sandpaper doesn't really get rid of scratches, doesn't really get rid of any carving marks. All it really does is just smooth that existing surface that we have. All the real work is done with sandpapers 1 and 2. And the carving is all done with sandpaper number 1. So now if I see any little scratches, I'm definitely going to use my thumb technique on those little areas. Get rid of them as quickly as possible. Pretty happy with that. I like that. So now that I'm happy with sandpaper number 2, I'll take sandpaper 2 out of my bucket, set it over with sandpaper number 1. And sandpaper number 3, the final one, is a 600 grit. This is our final sandpaper. This is just going to smooth the existing surface that we have. Again, this goes in the water. Rinse this seal off, making sure not to scrub it on the bottom of the bucket. And again, I'm just going to fold this sandpaper up to start. Roughly about the halfway mark, so I can have 2 even sides here. And same thing we do with sandpaper 1 and 2. Just going to scrub everywhere. If you did a good job with sandpaper number 1, sandpaper 2 is pretty quick, and sandpaper 3 is pretty easy. Because it's just that final sanding just to give a nice, smooth, glass-like finish. Feels really, really nice. And all those natural colors are really standing out right now, which is beautiful to see. And for those of you in the classroom, you're probably going to see a few different kinds of colors jumping out at you right now, because of the variety of the soapstone, the colors that are in there, and that is caused by the minerals that are in this stone. There's a metamorphic rock. For those of you in grade 3. on that little V there again. It's going to really fold my sandpaper up so we can tuck it into those hard to reach areas. Do the best job possible. Now, rinsing it off, taking a good look, just making sure there's no areas that I've really missed. If there's any scratches that I've left behind, the only way to really get rid of them would be to go to stage 1, make them small, so you can smooth them out with stage 2, right? It's part of that process. I'm sure you all worked really hard, did a really great job. And one of the things I really like about stone carving is how different that stone can look from when we started. It doesn't look anywhere near like it did when we first started. We brought out those natural colors, changed the texture on this as well. I really like it. So after I've finished all 3 of my sandpapers, I like the carving the way it is. I'm going to rinse this off in clean water and let it dry before the final step, which would be the finishing oil. We want to make sure we get rid of the dusty water that's on this stone, so that way we have no particles that are left on the surface before we add the oil. We want to make sure it's dry because, of course, oil and water don't mix, and that way we get a nice clean finish on our soapstone carving. So I'm going to go rinse this off and dry it, and then we'll come back and oil it. Okay, so now the seal is dry. Now we're going to add the oil finish. This is just 100% tung oil. This is the same oil that most wood carvers use to put the finish on cutting boards, stuff like that. So it's just a basic finishing oil. So we're just going to use the Q-tip here. Get a good bit on there. You'll notice that I put my soapstone on a piece of paper towel just to keep the oil from seeping through. So if you're in a classroom, just put some paper towel down as well. You'll also notice I'm laying it down as opposed to standing it up. This way, as it dries, if anybody's checking it out and it should fall over, it won't break or damage in any way. It's just safer if you lay it down as you do your oiling. Trying to be as liberal as I can. To kind of start on those edges. Now we're really going to see that color come out. And now that color is going to stay out. Instead of being that dull gray it was when it was dry. So once I've applied the oil, I can let this sit for a couple hours or even overnight. Once it's sat for a little while, just let that oil kind of penetrate into the stone. Pick it up, wipe it off with a different paper towel just to get any excess off of the stone itself. And that stone is ready to go. Your soapstone carving is finished. That looks pretty good. And we give you a fair amount of oil in there, so I actually have enough for a second coat should I want one after I've wiped off that original first coat. All right, so we finished our small seal today. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is David Swinowski from Rubble Road Soapstone Kits. If you have any comments you would like to share with us, please feel free to do so. If you'd like to see other shapes that we have available, check them out at rubble-road.com, or you can write us at rubbleroadsoapstone@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.